heroes and heroines to UHF's Part 3 of Character Creation, Characteristics. Your characteristics is the bare bones of your character. If you have a high strength for being strong, or if you're making an agile acrobat, your dex is going to be higher. Later on in the series, you'll be dealing with skills, and based on those skills, you may want to vary the values of those characteristics later on. If you have more dexterity skills, you might want to up your dexterity, etc. But also, if your character is particularly poor in something, you may want to sell your characteristics below their starting values. The first of characteristics is good old strength. It figures your lifting capacity and also your base hand-to-hand damage, which is strength divided by 5. Also, your strength roll is also based on this, which is the 9 plus strength divided by 5. And it has a base value of 10, and it costs 1 character point to raise it up 1. And when it comes to the lift capacity, it's how much you can lift and take 1 or 2 steps and then drop it. Your carrying strength is your strength divided by 2. So your base is 10 divided by 2, so your casual strength would be 5. And your hand-to-hand damage is figured accordingly, as well as your strength roll. Next we come to dexterity, which determines who acts first in combat, and also figures your dex-based skills, which is done the same way, 9 plus dex divided by 5. And your casual dex is the same as strength, it's half your dex. So, with the base 10 divided by 2, your casual dexterity is 5. Because there's a lot more dealing with dexterity, the cost is 2 character points per 1 of dex. The exception on who acts first in combat is lightning reflexes. We'll get into that later. Now we come to con, which determines if a character gets stunned in combat, and also constitution rolls. The base is also 10, and it costs 1 per 1 character point to raise it up 1 point. And when it comes to stun in combat, how much stunning damage has to exceed your con, and you're stunned for a phase. Now that we're done with the physical characteristics, now let's go into the mental characteristics, starting with intelligence. It provides what your perception roll is, as well as your intelligence skill rolls. Your perception roll is figured just like your skill roll is, 9 plus intelligence divided by 5, but can be enhanced with powers, which we'll go into later. It's also a base 10, and it costs 1 character point to raise it up 1 point. Now we come to ego. That provides resistance to most mental powers, as well as provide what your ego roll is. It's a base 10, and it raises 1 character point to raise it up 1 point. Ego also has a passive value, and also is figured, the skill rolls are figured the same when it comes to ego. Now we come to the last of our mental characteristics, presence. It allows you to make a presence attack as well as your presence skill rolls. The presence attack damage, well, the effect is your presence divided by 5, just like strength is figured. And what presence attacks does, how well you can awe your opponent, or make them delay a phase, or even longer if your presence is high enough against their presence. As discussed before with the previous characteristics we talk about, there is a roll involved with each of them, which is 9 plus the characteristic divided by 5. And the results can be, you can be proficient at a 10 or less, competent at 11 or less, skilled at 12 or less, or very skilled at 14 or less. In some superhero campaigns, it could be higher than, say, 20 or less, but there's far more negative connotations that could modify that roll in very stressful situations, or you're trying to do a skill in combat. Now we're getting into combat characteristics, and they determine how well you hit or defend in combat. First of all, we're starting with offensive combat value, known as OCV, which is how accurate you can hit something in combat, which has a base value of 3, and for 5 character points, it raises 1. It's expensive because it's a widely used characteristic. As offensive combat value is how well you hit, defensive combat value, DCV, indicates how hard you are to be hit in combat. It's also base value 3, and it costs 5 character points to raise it up 1. As OCV is in physical combat, offensive mental combat value, or OMCV, is for mental combat, such as using telekinesis or mental blast, etc. And it's a base value of 3 as well, but it costs only 3 points to raise it up 1 point because mental powers are not as prevalent. Again, as DCV was for physical combat, defensive mental combat value, DMCV, is just for that, how hard it is to hit you in mental combat. And its base value is 3, and it's 3 character points to raise it 1 point, just like OMCV. As I stated before with combat values, OCV and OMCV and DCV and DMCV is figured by your CV, whether mental or physical, plus 11 minus 3d6 equals the DMCV or DCV that you hit. And here's an easy chart that's in the book that will help you figure out those rolls, and you modify it by 1 or 2 or 3 depending on modifiers, depending on range and so forth, for easy reference. There are plenty of these tables in the book to help you until you get the hang of it. Next in combat characteristics we have speed. This is how frequently your character gets to act in a turn, which has 12 segments. Base value is 2, and it costs 10 points to raise it up 1, because it's a very important characteristic. And included here, which is also in the book, is a speed chart, which shows when you go in combat. When the GM says, okay, phase 2, this is segment 2. Segment 2 people can go. Now, the only ones that can move on segment 2 is everybody that's speed 6 or higher. Then your dexterity characteristic comes into play. If there's a tie, then whoever has the higher dexterity goes. And that's when lightning reflexes can come in handy, which we'll discuss in another video. Now we come into what I call defenses. First of all, we have physical defense. It's how tough you are against physical attacks such as punches and clubs. It's a base 2, and it costs 1 to raise it 1. And it works kind of simply where, let's say you get hit by a club, which does die 6 normal damage. Let's say it does average 3 points. Then you subtract 2, which is your base 2, from it, and you take 1 point of stunning damage. Next in defenses, we have energy defense, ED. It's how well you can defend against energy attacks such as fire and lasers. Let's say you get hit with a die 6 fire blast. Again, you take 3 points damage, minus 2 from your base value. You have 1 point of stunning damage. Now we come into what I call the life characteristics. First is recovery. It's how fast you recover from being knocked out or being injured. Its base value is 4, and it takes 1 character point to raise it up 1 point. Like in the previous examples, let's say you take that 1 point of stun damage, you take a recovery, which is 4, which you only took 1, so you're back up to full again. Now, this characteristic is how much you recover in a turn, but you can do it in combat, which you have permission that if you abort 2 recovery, you can take an entire phase and take recovery at that time. Also, it's how much you can recover from your body as well. But that is typically how much you recover in 1 month's time. Unless, of course, changed by your GM and depending on the genre and power levels. Next in the life characteristics is endurance. It's your personal energy that fuels your powers and your characteristics. Now, let's say you decide to hit somebody with your 10 strength, which is 2 dice 6, and it costs 1 endurance. Because in a, let's say, superhero campaign, it costs 1 endurance per 10 active points you put into it. Your base value is 10, so you expend your 1 endurance. And again, depending on campaign, this can vary how much your endurance cost is for your powers and abilities. Next in our life characteristics we have body. It's how much you can take before you die, how hard it is to kill you, and what it takes to die in this game is how much body you start with. Let's say you have the base value 10. Once you hit -10, that's when you die. Let's say you have spent a couple points and you raise it to 12. It takes -12 to outright kill you. And most attacks, such as normal attacks, your body's figured, let's say the 1 dice 6. Every 6 is 2 body, every 1 is 0, every 2 to 5 is 1 body damage. But if it's a killing attack, such as a sword, a 1 dice 6 is how the total of the die is how much body you take. And of course, against resistant defenses, which we'll talk in another video. Finally, we have stun. It indicates how hard it is to knock out your character. Your base value is 20, and it costs 1 character point to raise it 2 points. And the exception is when you get an overwhelming amount of stun. Something causes enough stun that exceeds your constitution score, you'll be stunned. How stun depends on how much stun over that con characteristic you're stunned for. Also for here, if your stun reaches 0 or below, you are stunned. How far in the negative you are depends on, that will determine how long you're stunned. Thank you for tuning in to UHF 63, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe. And if you like to further this channel, there is a link below for Patreon for donations. And always be a hero, and next time we'll go over abilities for character creation.